I can't leave the washroom, but I'm in a really good mood. In the Christian world, we find all kinds of excuses not to listen to God's voice. That's the preacher's job. That's Sherry's job. Well, it's not my gift, you understand. I've already served. Let somebody else do it. I'm too busy. I'm too tired. I'm too worn out. I'm too old. I'm too young. All of these excuses not to listen to God. It has been said, excuses are the tools of the incompetent, and those who specialize in them never go too far. And Benjamin Franklin wrote, "He that is good for making excuses is seldom good for anything else." For the next few weeks, we're going to talk about Jeremiah. He had every excuse ready when God told him he wanted him to be a prophet. And his excuses are often our excuses for not being obedient to God. Countering each excuse that Jeremiah put forward was a promise from God. Excuses from Jeremiah, promises from God. The first excuse is, but it's too hard. Jeremiah was called to be a prophet to the nations, not a priest like his father and his grandfather. We often think of prophets as those being the ones to tell the future. But in reality, what they are doing is they are speaking to the present in order to have future consequences and ramifications. Being a prophet was much more demanding than being a priest. A priest's duties were predictable. They were always in the temple. But a prophet was called to go out among the people, to proclaim to them where they had erred, where they had strayed from God. Priests worked primarily to preserve the past, and prophets were called to change the future. Priests dealt with the rituals, the sacrifices, the offerings, the services, anything that happened in the temple. And prophets were taught, and they were called to change people's hearts and lives. And they did that by announcing change, by trying to modify the behaviors around him. Jeremiah was trying to change the heart of the people of Israel. And nobody likes it when that word comes up. They didn't 3,000, 4,000 years ago, and we still have a problem with that word, change. Are you hoping for a change here at St. Giles? Are you willing to stand up and be the voice for that change? Or are you most content with not having to change and not having to think about the future? Here's the promise, on the other hand, from God. God may assign you a demanding task, but his call keeps us going when we don't want to, when we don't think we have the energy to. We have the promise of God's purpose. I chose you before I formed you in the womb. I set you apart before you were born. God chose Jeremiah. God appointed Jeremiah. He was known by God by name. God knew him before he was born and had commissioned him to serve before he left his mother's womb. That gives people a great sense of purpose, to know we are called by God. The promise of God's purpose is to allow us to let go of our plans and our arrogance and our conceit and receive God's plans without fear. Like Jeremiah, we need to accept that our future is not our own. We are God's. The future is God's. He has a distinct plan and purpose for our lives and for the lives who will come after us, the children. Second excuse that Jeremiah uses, well, I don't know how to do that. Am I getting good at this whining thing? I've been practicing all week. Jeremiah 1:6 says, "But I protested, O Lord God, no. Look, I don't know how to speak since I am only a youth." Some translations, as we heard today, said a boy. But Jeremiah was called when he was probably in his early to mid-20s. And he said he felt inadequate to be a speaker. God has a way of overcoming our weaknesses and our insufficiencies, doesn't he? Let me tell you that when I was a young girl, grade 1, 2, 3, I went to a special class every single week because I stuttered. For 3 years, I stuttered. And then, over time, it left. God has a way of preparing us to do God's work. Over the years, my inadequacy has caused me to rely on God so often, on His power, on His strength. His strength is made perfect in my weakness. His glory is manifested in my flaws. I could never do this on my own. And just about the time I think I can, when I'm starting to get a little big for my britches, God reminds me who's in charge, who is doing the real work, who has the power to do this. God's promise is that while our talent may be inadequate, God always equips those He calls. Jeremiah 1:9 says, "Then the Lord reached out His hand, touched my mouth, and told me, I have now filled your mouth with my words." Every Sunday, before I start the service, I pray, God, give me your words, because mine are insufficient and inadequate. The touch that God gave to Jeremiah on his mouth was not so much to purify as to inspire and to empower Jeremiah to do what he needed him to do. The symbolic gift of prophecy was given to Jeremiah in that touch. God blesses not the great orator, but the one whose tongue has been touched by His grace, coals from His altar. God doesn't use the gifted and the talented, but the one who is touched by the hand of God, who listens, who takes it to heart. God uses the most unlikely people to change a church or a community or a nation. Never underestimate the power of a touch, especially when it is God who is doing the touching. Next excuse for Jeremiah was, it's not the right time right now. Jeremiah said to God, I am only a youth. His reply was not revealing so much about his age as his sense of spiritual immaturity. He felt inferior. He felt inexperienced and intimidated by the size and the magnitude of this task that God was calling him to. Maybe you're feeling this. Maybe you're expressing those words when you're thinking about service in God's church, in this church. It's not time for me right now. It's not good. I don't have the time. My life is too busy. God's promise to Jeremiah was that he is not sending him out to do this alone. We have the promise of God's presence. Then the Lord said to me, "Do not say, 'I am only a youth,' for you will go to everyone I send you to and speak whatever I tell you. Do not be afraid of anyone, for I will be with you to deliver you." This is the Lord's promise. There is a condition in this promise. Jeremiah could experience God's presence when he went where God told him to go, when he did what God needed him to do. God promised, "I will not leave you. I will be with you. Don't worry." Someone once said that when God calls us to do a task, he doesn't give us a roadmap to follow and then leave us to our own resources. No, he walks with us every step of life's journey. And his presence gives us the strength to stand in the face of every challenge, every assault, everything that we feel is going wrong in our lives. What a difference it makes when we think about that we are not alone, that wherever he sends us, he goes with us. We don't have to walk the lonesome roads by ourselves. We always have a traveling companion, a companion who orders and orchestrates our lives, and if we are obedient to his call on our lives, we are fulfilled. He will give us the time to do his work. Jeremiah's next excuse: "It's dangerous. It's unpopular. People won't like me." That's a big one. We are really focused on if people like us. If we consider the task to be a little unpopular or a little dangerous, we'll find and we'll use that excuse. God did not give Jeremiah a joyful message of delivery to announce, but a tragic message of judgment, pain to the world, as we saw in the video. This judgment caused Jeremiah to be condemned, to be persecuted, to be arrested, to be imprisoned. It wasn't a happy time. More than once, his life was threatened. Jeremiah told the people of Israel plainly, "You are defying the Lord. You have stepped away from the Lord. You are not paying attention. You are worshiping other idols. And this idolatry and rebellion against God's righteous will was putting their eternal lives at jeopardy." They didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to hear the truth. Nobody wants to hear that they are going to hell in a handbasket. But that's what Jeremiah was called to tell them to do, to try to change what they were doing. And the promise from God: "I'll give you the strength. I will give you what you need, even though the way is dangerous." We have the promise of God's prevailing. "Today I am the one who has made you. They will fight against you, but never prevail over you, since I am with you to rescue you." God assured Jeremiah, yes, they will attack you, but no, they will never overcome you. The person who stands with God will prevail. With God, there is always one and then a majority. One with God is a majority. Alone we are helpless. With God, we will prevail. I have to tell you this wonderful story I came across. In the days of the Roman Empire, we're talking around the 400s, That great Colosseum in Rome, and you could picture it in your head, can't you, was absolutely filled to capacity with spectators coming to watch the state games, watching humans battle against wild beasts until one or the other died. And it seemed that the crowd delighted most when human blood was shed. In 404 AD, as a vast crowd watched the contest, a Syrian monk by the name of Telemachus leaped into the middle of the Colosseum floor. So torn was he by this utter disregard for human life that he stood in the middle and he yelled, "In the name of God, this thing is not right. In the name of God, this thing must stop." The spectators were enraged that he was interrupting their entertainment. They mocked him. They threw objects at him, and caught up in the excitement, one of the gladiators actually ran him through with a sword, and he died right there. This gentle monk fell to the ground dead, and the entire Colosseum fell silent. It seemed like for the very first time, these people with their insatiable bloodlust recognized the horror of what they called entertainment. Telemachus kindled a flame in their hearts and their consciences. And history records that because of this very courageous act of a simple monk who spoke with God, that these combats began to decline and very shortly disappeared from the scene. Because one man dared to say what was right. He spoke in the name of God. His message was dangerous. His message was wildly unpopular, and it changed the people. Because he died, his message prevailed. Jeremiah's next excuse: do I have to go now? God was expecting immediate action from Jeremiah. He said to him, "Now, get ready. Stand up and tell them everything that I have commanded you." God called Jeremiah to act. And not act next week or in a couple of weeks or next year. Now, he called Jeremiah to move out among his people because time was imminent. He was called to share this offensive message, but this message that would change their ways, that would change what they had always done. He wasn't welcomed. He wasn't accepted. He would anger those who hurt him. Surely that could wait for another day, another week, another decade. We would procrastinate, I'm certain, if we were given that challenge. But God's promise is that when we listen, when we obey, and when we do it immediately, this is when God works through us in the most wonderful ways. Has God called you to do something in ministry for his church, in a small way, in a big way? Then he will fulfill his purpose in you. He will equip you. He will enable you. He will protect you. He will walk with you through everything. Are you obeying his commands? Well, then, he's there to protect you. Are you sharing the word, the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Then he will accomplish his purposes in you, no matter what people say. Are you doing the work of ministry that God needs you to do, then He will give you the tools and the time and the talent to fulfill His purposes in you. Excuses don't cut it with God, but His promises are sure and certain, and they will sustain you for all He calls you to do. Amen.